Perfect. Amazing. So yeah, nice to meet everyone. Thank you for taking some time out on a Thursday morning to come and listen to me talk about cloudification. So I work for Telefonica Tech. We are a business unit within the global telco of Telefonica. We're the specialist digital consultancy arm here in the UK, helping customers adopt cloud, adopt cybersecurity, adopt AI, and transform from a technology perspective. I think I've got a pretty cool job, and I'm pretty lucky to have the job I have because I essentially get to work with telcos, with all manner of organizations, helping to drive cloud adoption, cloud innovation, and technology innovation into their organizations. And it's pretty fortunate because it means I get to see both what actually works and what goes well, but also for me personally, I find more interesting when actually what doesn't work, when do things go wrong? What are the sorts of common problems that people are encountering, and how can we solve them? For context, I previously used to work at Unilever in the cloud space there as part of their accelerated cloud migration program. I ran my own tech startup on AWS previously, and then spent the last few years in cloud advisory roles, helping executives map out cloud adoption for their organizations and help them get the most value from cloud inside of their organization. So I was pretty happy when Mobile Europe asked me to come and present today on some of the challenges that we're seeing from a cloudification point of view. And I just want to start by sort of setting the context. I think for me, with the organizations and the telcos that I'm working with, we've very much left the cloud migration hype era. The conversations are no longer rooted in should we migrate, when should we migrate. It's not if, but it's when and how do we get there? How do we modernize? What else should we be thinking about, and what else should we be doing? Because the vast majority of organizations have already adopted cloud. They are running production environments, they are developing applications, they are scaling data and AI platforms. However, the real challenge now, from a cloudification point of view, is that very few of those organizations that have adopted public cloud are actually either modernizing to become cloud or AI native, or they're struggling to achieve the full value from their cloud investment. And I think that this sort of breaks down into four key challenges, which is what I'm going to go through today. The first being controlling cloud costs. I think FinOps has had its moment in the sunshine over the last couple of years, but it still continues to be a pressing problem from a cloudification point of view. And now AI costs are being introduced. This only increases by financial management overhead for running a cloud platform. The second point that I want to cover is rethinking operating models. If you had dysfunctional digital processes on prem, you migrate to cloud, you're still going to have those processes. Cloud isn't the silver bullet there. I then want to go through application modernization. So how do we, when we migrate applications to cloud, actually start to modernize them so they're stateless, they're ephemeral, they're cloud native, and so then you're actually exploiting the fundamental building blocks you get from a public cloud platform. And then it wouldn't be a webinar in 2026 without someone mentioning agents and workflows. And so I'll sort of, to end, we'll touch on how we're starting to insert agents into cloud workflows and cloud operations, and some of the examples and use cases that I'm working on too. So without further ado, I will jump straight into controlling cloud costs. So one of the key problems that I run into with a lot of organizations from a cloud financial management perspective is that the original budget for cloud and the original investment case was off. They fail to account for the true total cost of ownership. And so when a CTO comes and says, hang on a minute, we're spending lots on cloud, it's too expensive, it's often because there was never a true total cost of ownership calculated for cloud adoption inside of their organization. What might have happened is they took a migration planning tool, they scanned their virtual machines on-prem, they mapped them to VMs on cloud or EC2 instances or whatever, and they've sort of done a like-for-like comparison. They've lifted and shifted, and they've parked these workloads into cloud, and suddenly their spend is far higher than what they originally thought it was going to be. And so they haven't budgeted for it, they haven't forecasted for it, and they're struggling to then justify that cloud investment. This tends to be from a few reasons. One, as I sort of just mentioned, they've relied too heavily on cloud planning tools, and so everything from a cost modeling perspective was based on reserved instances or savings plans being applied from day zero. Anyone that's done a cloud transformation or done a cloud migration knows that that isn't the reality. You can't have 100% coverage on reserved instances on your cloud estate from day zero. That's just not how cloud works. And so we often find one of the challenges from a cloudification point of view to actually drive further cloud adoption is the executive committee already think cloud's expensive because the original budget put to them was wildly inaccurate. The other common thing that people overlook from an original cloud financial management forecasting perspective was they underestimated dual running costs. They forgot that you can't just flick a switch and suddenly be migrated. As part of that migration cost bubble, they never actually forecasted what the dual running period was going to be because they're still going to have an on-premise data center footprint. They're still going to have hardware or licensing sat on their books that they're depreciating over 3, 4, or 5 years. And so when cloud consumption and cloud adoption starts ramping up and people spin up new services onto a public cloud platform, you're suddenly hit by this dual running period where you're still continuing to fund your data center, but you're also having to pay the hyperscaler on a monthly basis. And CFOs are not your friend when that happens. And then moving on from this as well, when you then start to look at, okay, we've done the business case, we've migrated to cloud. Okay, we didn't get the accurate quite right, but we're now going to start looking at adopting FinOps. How do we do that? How do we make sure that when we adopt cloud, it's done in a cost efficient manner and that people take accountability for their spend? Because cloud is a fundamentally different financial model to on-prem. And so in a perfect world, when you're a CTO running a cloud platform, it's brilliant because the OpEx nature of cloud means that your costs should, in theory, match your business activity. If you've got dynamic, scalable, OpEx-driven applications running in cloud, they should scale efficiently to match business costs or transaction costs. And then over time, what should happen is you should achieve unit economics whereby the more activity that goes through your application on cloud, the lower the cost per transaction is, but potentially the higher the total cost of ownership is. And that's okay because you've got economies of scale in your favor, your transaction costs are going down, even though your cloud's total cloud spend is going up. And so you say, actually, yes, we're spending more year on year, maybe 10% more, but actually that 10% in cloud cost growth is because we've got 20% more users going through these applications. So actually we're winning. The reality is that cloud costs are actually very different for a lot of different organizations. Everyone probably is sort of aware of that 30% number of cloud waste, that of your complete cloud bill, approximately 30% of that is going to be wasted spend. And this is where we see that challenge of uncontrolled cloud costs. Cloud is expensive. Why is it so expensive? And it's because there'll be a whole load of hidden cloud wastage living within inside of your cloud platform. That might be driven by underutilization. So people lifted and shifted virtual machines to cloud and they're only running at 10% of their utilization. They've got no scaling policies. They actually should be better off running as PaaS services. Maybe there's no discounts. There's no committed usage discounts. You haven't got a PPA. You haven't got an EA from Microsoft. And so you're just paying full list price for everything. Or you've even got poor tagging. So you don't even know what's driving your cost. You don't even know which applications cost what, which business units cost what. And this is the tipping point from a cloud adoption point of view, where organizations then start taking note of FinOps and they go, hang on a minute, we need to start driving out some optimizations. And so what I then tend to see happen is organizations go through periodic optimizations. They'll call in someone like me, or they'll call in a cloud architect from a team and go, look, we're spending too much money on cloud. The CFO is bashing us. We need to drive down the spend. And so they will go and do a one-time cost audit, cost cleanup. They'll go and identify all the wasted spend and they'll start removing it. But in that scenario, what will happen after 3 or 6 months is the cloud architecture patterns or deployment patterns or team processes that cause spend to become uncontrolled were never fixed. And so, yes, you've deleted all the zombies and all the wasted resources inside of your environment, but you haven't embedded FinOps into your ways of working. And so those poor original behaviors, which cause cloud costs to increase, will just return. I always think of cloud costs as being a symptom as to how efficiently you're architected your applications. So before you even start thinking about how do we reduce spend, you need to think about the bigger holistic picture. And this is where FinOps comes into its own. When you can then embed FinOps as part of your operating model, you get engineers to actually start taking ownership for cloud spend so they understand the cost implication of deploying the most expensive VM. That's when architecture teams start using cost as a key principle. And so those teams are no longer detached from their cloud bill. They understand we should be trying to get to perfect unit economics, and you can start driving out proactive cost avoidance across your cloud platform. And so how do you get to that point? I always think of it in sort of how do we create that optimization flywheel? How do we start embedding financial intelligence into our cloud operating model? I sort of view it in two cycles. The first is that optimization cycle. So go and select the best fit tool for your environment. Some tools are great at reporting from a FinOps perspective. Some are great at automatic reservation purchasing. There's about 150 FinOps tools in the market. Go and find the best tool for your business and your cloud platform. Then go and start tagging so you get cost transparency and you can start allocating costs to business units or applications. And then you can start identifying that potential wasted spend. But again, in this loop, you're still just going to get trapped in reactively tidying up cloud waste from your environment. You're not actually going to be driving out proactive cost avoidance, so waste never hits your bill. To get to that point, in my opinion, what you then need to start doing is embedding some of those FinOps disciplines into your organization. And there's a few ways you can do this. The first is to start reporting to IT leadership, elevate the conversation, get cover from C-suite individuals to highlight to them the opportunities that FinOps can bring to their organization. Get their exec buy-in. So when you go and work with other teams, you have the support and the backing for them to actually listen to your cost optimization recommendations. Start measuring cloud cost and business value KPIs. It goes back to that unit economics point. Unit economics is really hard to achieve, but if you can start trying to tie cloud spend to what the business is doing, then it's a completely different value conversation, and cloud won't just be seen as a cost center. And that's when you can start getting into fast flow of collaboration between your cloud teams, between your engineering teams, your application teams, your finance teams, or procurement teams, because they all see that cloud is that digital backbone of their organization and that everyone needs to take ownership for their cloud spend to make sure that you can get full value from your cloud investment. But FinOps isn't the only thing. As I sort of touched upon, it's the operating model is just as important. And ultimately, one of the key principles for modernizing on cloud was to increase innovation. And how you enable innovation inside of organizations has been a key question that businesses have been trying to answer for years. What you can see here on the screen is a productivity manual that the US central government created in the 80s, I think. It was designed for their nuclear engineering team, for a group of highly skilled individuals, and they were asking how do we enable these people to drive innovation and do great work. And so they created a set of policies to encourage them. It had things like insist on doing everything through the right channels, never take any shortcuts, always haggle over the precise wordings of communications, always have meetings to agree a meeting before a big meeting to then make the decision. Always advocate to be cautious and reasonable. Don't just experiment and innovate. Be cautious. Always refer to irrelevant issues as frequently as possible. And so you're probably thinking, oh, that's a bit strange. Those are weird recommendations to be making. And it's because they're not. Those are not. This is not recommendations for how to be productive, but this is actually a sabotage field manual that the US government created in the Cold War for how to kill your own transformation, how to embed yourself into an opposing organization and kill their innovation curve. And so when people start setting up ridiculous meetings, they're slowing down that innovation curve because you're not able to actually drive any thought leadership, experimentation, or ideation. And so that is what happens from a cloudification point of view. If you do not transform your own organization, you don't transform your operating model and your ways of working, you're killing any chance you have of actually obtaining the benefit from that new platform. And so one of the key things I always say to the organizations and the execs I work with is that this has to be an operating model evolution as well as a technology platform change. We have to start looking at how do we infuse new skills into our teams, not just so they're cloud certified and they've got their cloud certifications and they've ticked off their solutions architecture badge, but how do we make sure that we create a continuous learning environment full of people who want to experiment, want to innovate, because the cloud innovation curve is enormous. The hyperscalers release new technologies on an ongoing basis. So how do we make sure our teams are equipped to not just learn the cloud skills they need today, but also learn the cloud and the AI skills they need in 2 or 3 years to really deliver on that investment we've made? How do we start looking at new tools, new governance, new processes, new procurement to make sure that we're actually getting the full benefit from our cloud platform? And I think one of the key things that I do with customers and organizations is I measure how fast it takes to provision a new environment and deploy a resource. If the whole point of cloud is agility and innovation, if it's taking you days or weeks to deploy environments and resources, you haven't adopted cloud. You're still running in an on-prem way of working. And so starting to identify from a value stream mapping point of view, what are the parts of our ways of working and processes that we need to evolve to exploit cloudification will then help identify where you should prioritize your efforts, whether that's automated environment provisioning, whether that's reusable modules and patterns to deploy resources, or anything else in between. Moving on to application modernization. Okay, great. So we've migrated, we're running on cloud. Now, how do we start modernizing the actual applications that we've got that are on cloud? And one of the key cloudification traps that I see organizations getting stuck in is only migrating. They never actually modernize. They're very happy to take the easy path and lift and shift their applications, maybe park them on some reserved instances, as you can see in the middle, maybe containerize a few, but fundamentally, they're not fully modernizing their applications to be cloud and AI native. They're not looking to infuse event-driven architecture patterns, so you create stateless and ephemeral applications. They're not looking at agentic workflows. They're not looking at self-healing applications that automatically resolve themselves when they hit problems. They've lifted and shifted and they're happy. And then a year or so later, they turn around and they go, well, hang on a minute. Why is we're not experiencing the agility and the innovation that we were promised from our hyperscaler? And a lot of the time it's because of this, because they haven't actually enabled that innovation velocity, because their applications are essentially the same applications that they built and were running on premise as well. And so one of the key ways that I start to think about this is that modernization patterns are expanding. You have a greater ability now to apply modern software and application principles to actually unlock cloud. One of the key classic problems we encounter with organizations tackling cloudification is that they have constrained architectures, they're running monolithic, tightly coupled applications, they have limited visibility, there's no documentation, they don't understand where their vulnerabilities are in that tech stack, or their teams are just completely stuck in maintenance mode. So their engineers, all they're doing is fixing bugs, remediating technical debt. They're not actually pushing out new features. They're not pushing out optimization tickets. They're not driving innovation. They're just firefighting to keep that application online. And so if you want to start truly modernizing your applications for cloud and adopting and challenging any cloudification problems that you get, you need to then start looking at AI native software engineering processes. How do we then start doing test generation or automated code generation for our applications? How do we start looking at self-maintaining applications or building out MCP bridges? How do we start experimenting with these things? And this is all probably slightly hypothetical. And so the way I start this cloudification problem is I always say to pick a highly visible and a highly valuable application, which is probably counterintuitive to what people said 5 years ago when it came from a migration perspective. Pick a low-hanging fruit, get early momentum, show that cloud can run. We know that you can modernize on cloud now. It's not is it possible? We know it's possible. And so to go and make that point, I prefer to pick a highly visible application. So it's an application people actually experience problems with. There's no point modernizing an app that no one touches. So pick a highly visible app. That way people can see and experience the benefits. And then pick a valuable application. Pick one that either is a central cog in your business process, pick one for your organization that is maybe revenue generating, or pick one that is used by a subset of users inside of your organization who are very, very important, whether that's an executive team or a sales team or a revenue generating team. But pick a valuable application, because that way you will actually get a return on investment for modernizing that app. There's no point modernizing a COTS app, which is stuck with heritage support requirements and specific VM SKUs. So pick a highly visible one, pick a highly valuable one, and rather than trying to get stuck in firefighting, start trying to infuse modern software and application principles to really unlock the cloud innovation curve. Start decoupling your application, start using AI code generation tools to identify those bounded context and SIMs within your software so you can containerize them or use event-driven architecture patterns. Go and start creating MCP bridges so that way agents can query your applications faster. Go and look at how we can use agentic automation for documentation so your teams don't get stuck in writing endless architecture documents. There's a whole world of modernization patterns which are constantly expanding. And so if you can start applying those to those highly visible and valuable applications, you will demonstrate to your organization the power of cloudification. The last thing that I want to touch on is about agentic teammates. I think a lot of organizations I'm working with are starting to now ask about how do we take agents and put them into cloud workflows. I think agents and LLMs and MCPs in the software generation world for software engineers is a great product market fit for the likes of Anthropic and OpenAI, because they're enabling software engineers to ship faster, build faster, write code faster, or review code faster, really. But how do we actually take those capabilities and apply them into the cloud world, the actual cloud platform, not the software engineering level? And I think I tend to talk about these three principles to shape adoption of agents inside of the cloud workspace. The first is that you need to direct them as teammates. As I sort of mentioned around process redesign and operating models, you have to use agents as teammates to actually execute a specific task rather than as reactive assistants. Try and shift towards the frontier where you have an operating model where agents can swarm and they have singular bounded tasks which they execute against that they can continuously improve at. And from a leadership and from an adoption point of view, make sure that you're creating a win-win dynamic for your engineers. You don't want cloud engineers viewing this as a threat to their survival, because they will reject it. They will throw endless obstacles in the way. Use this as an opportunity to enable them to shift from firefighting and into more exciting cloud activities like platform engineering or developer experiences or internal developer portals, and say, actually, we can solve the problem of having to always update documentation and provision environments, and we can get you doing much more exciting activities. The second is to really embed them in system context. The number one enemy of agents and LLMs is the tacit knowledge that will sit inside of your engineer's head. If only they know how a system works or how an API is built between two critical applications, the agent will never know. And so you have to start teaching that agent and codifying that skill set into the agent as a boundary so it really understands your systems and understands the context it should be operating in. And then the final thing is to create trust through guardrails. If you don't have a governance framework with a human in the loop to start with, people will get nervous, they will reject it, they will see the risks and potentially untraceable changes happening, and they won't allow you to start innovating and testing agents in your cloud workflow. And from a governance point of view, this is the sort of MCP and agent design considerations that I use when I'm working to build agents into my cloud platforms. Lots of details on this slide, but I think the key thing, two key things, are system boundaries and user and system authentication. If you can create bounded context for your MCPs and agents, so they only live inside of one world, they only have access to one set of systems, maybe they only have read-only access, they can't even touch anything, but create that bounded context for those agents to operate, and avoid creating godlike access. It's the same process of applying least privilege that we do on cloud with RBAC models. Keep the agents contained to only the data and only the systems they need. Avoid permissions drift, where agents somehow manage to accrue all the permissions inside of their environment. And to end with, the two sort of insertion points that I'm seeing customers have the most success with and that we're having the most success with are, one, building FinOps agents. So we're seeing we've built a anomaly triage agent, which basically for Azure sits and reads the cost data from a subscription, starts to identify if there's any anomalous spend going on inside of it, and then automatically talks to the tagged business or application owner to tell them what changed, why, and codify it with a skill set for what to do in each of those scenarios. And that as an outcome just means that people can act faster on that spend, and you can optimize your cloud spend as well. The second agent that we're getting a lot of success with in the cloud workspace is that AWS DevOps agent that's been released recently. It's incredibly powerful to almost be your DevOps assistant to on-call engineers. It can't touch your production environment, but in the time that an incident might occur, by the time you as an engineer actually log on to start understanding what's happened, that DevOps agent is living inside of your AWS environment. It's mapping out the topology, it's mapping out the integration points, it's mapping out the applications, and it will work backwards through that tech stack. So if there's an incident, it will give you its view of the world just to help accelerate that cold start. Like, no one from an ops perspective wants to be logging in, everything's red, everything's flashing, it's all broken, and you don't know where to start. Having that agent just as your 24/7 support buddy or teammate is doing really impressive things for people trying to tackle agents and cloudification too. I will pause there. But thank you so much for listening to me on a Thursday morning talk about cloudification, talk about FinOps, talk about app mod, talk about operating models. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, please do feel free to put them in the chat or reach out to myself or any of the Mobile Europe team after.
Well, Daniel, that was quite a tour de force and really interesting. Some interesting vocabulary in there. I like godlike access and the agents as teammates. I thought was quite interesting. We have a couple of questions from our audience. The first is how to optimize on prem costs, I guess,
Yes.
in parallel with your cloudification efforts.
Yeah. So I think the key thing to recognize between cloud costs and on-prem costs, cloud costs, you get an absolute hose pipe of data. So, and it's all variable cost. So you can start optimizing in real time. On-prem, to optimize on-prem costs, one, you need to map out the financial rhythm of your purchases. So things will come up for renewal at different points of times. Get a view as to when those renewals are with which vendors, and then you can start identifying overlapping spend, identify optimizations for consolidation. And then the second thing for on-prem is always just combing through CMDBs and asset libraries. Basically make sure that you haven't got orphan services running, you haven't got orphan servers running or storage arrays. I've done migrations before where we've emptied data centers and there's a server running and we think something's on it, and you turn it off and no one shouts because it's just become orphaned over time. So yeah, 2 points. One, map out that financial rhythm, identify opportunities for consolidation, and two, just be on top of housekeeping in your CMDB to make sure anything running in your environment that you're paying for is actually useful to someone in your organization.
Okay, and the second thing is, what are the key critical tags needed for the best alignment between FinOps and ITFM stroke cost transparency, supporting cost allocation? I hope that means more to you.
That makes sense to me. That makes sense to me. That's a question that we're sort of getting asked a lot from customers and organizations at the moment. How do you take cloud financial management and interlink it into broader enterprise IT financial management or technology business management? Obviously, cloud is only one cost tower inside of an enterprise organization. You've got cloud costs, you've got operational costs, you've got broader financial costs, people costs, software costs, etc. Um, for me personally, from a critical tags needed, I would focus on making sure the FinOps team have the handle on the cloud environment. Cloud spend is complex, cloud billing data is complex. So make sure they have mastery of that world and create some form of interface or API, or pick a tool that can do both cloud costs and ITFM costs. So that way the FinOps team own that domain, they optimize it, they run it, and then they can share the information and the tags needed into the broader ITFM or TBM team. And so that way they own that broader enterprise IT cost allocation model, and they just take what they need from the FinOps team. Because as with the on-prem cost question, they've got very different financial rhythms. So trying to merge the two, it can be quite hard at times.
I was interested in your comments on creating agents. I talked to Mark Dusner, who's CTIO at Swisscom recently, and he said concerning cost and effort, when you're coming up with an agent, 50% is about redesigning processes and hard questions about data. He
Yep.
said 35% is around identifying or building APIs, and only 15% is about the agent itself. And I thought that was really illuminating, because I guess the temptation might be to begin with the agent.
It's an agent is there to accelerate a process, to
Yeah.
do a thing for you. So if yeah, I completely agree. If you don't understand what that process is and which part you want to accelerate, then you're just going to be creating chaos inside of your organization. So that makes perfect sense. And a lot of applications were never built with cloud or agents in mind. So they might not have
No.
the APIs, they might not have the data capabilities to actually talk to agents. And so I've got software engineers working for me, and that's all they do. All they're doing is focusing on the integration and the orchestration between agents and legacy apps. And then we'll have specialist data engineers or AI engineers fine tuning the LLM results that feed the agent.
And I'll leave you with one final comment from a very large European operator, and who reports to the CTO office, who told me that you can suddenly find yourself with a lot of agents that are doing a lot of chatting to each other, therefore racking up cost, but they aren't actually achieving very much, a bit like people can chat a lot without getting much done. So I thought that was quite entertaining. And it's also kind of in line with your thinking about the agents as teammates.
Yeah.
It's kind of, part of almost a humanization of the whole thing, really. Daniel, thank you so much. We hope you'll join us again at a future event. In the meantime, I'd just like to thank you. I thought that was a great presentation.
Thank you so much. Have a good day. Bye.
We will.